It's awful that here we are, the capital of the United States of America, and right in the shadow of the capital of the United States.
A few blocks
from the capital of the United States.
In the Americas, there's a revival of democracy. From north to south, everyone wants the freedom to speak. It's out in the open after years of fierce oppression. An observer of the elections in Nicaragua, Panama, and Haiti, past President Jimmy Carter.
Well, the process of democratization was brought about by global pressure on military dictators in countries like Argentina, Chile, Paraguay, Brazil, to acknowledge the rights of their own people.
But the small advances towards democracy are tenuous. A case in point, Chile.
That's okay. Mickey Mouse counts.
Yeah, okay.
Mickey Mouse counts.
That's why I vote for if my money decided.
In the United States, a democracy from its beginnings, half the citizens no longer vote.
I'm for everybody voting. I'd like to see us vote 100%.
As El Salvador recovers from its bloody civil war, democracy is seen as a vote for the future. Nobel Prize winner and past president of Costa Rica, Oscar Arias.
La democracia es una actitud, es una personalidad.
Democracy is an attitude, an approach to life. Just as there are authoritarians, there must be democrats, people who can learn to be tolerant.
In 1989, after 16 years of dictatorship, Chile and its 13 million citizens won their bitter struggle for democracy. But it's a fragile victory with no shared vision of its meaning. In a suburb of Santiago, in the cellars of one of Chile's largest wine producers, it is cause for celebration. Rafael Gilisasti's family controls the great vineyards of Concha y Toro. A group of Canadian and U.S. food and wine reporters are on a guided tour. In the society of this successful Chilean exporter, democracy is applauded. For most people, however, the victory is more modest. Manuel Parra owns and drives one of the 12,000 private taxi buses that clog downtown Santiago. 18 hours a day, he maneuvers through chaotic traffic in a city of more than 4 million people. Like hundreds of thousands of Chileans, he was forced into exile during the Pinochet dictatorship. Now he's happy to be home, but life is harder than ever. For Manuel and many others, democracy has not yet fulfilled its promise. This little demon, part of the show for North American visitors, is a character from Chilean winemaking legends. He protects the wine barrels from thieves. Other ghosts from General Pinochet's regime also live on in Chile. The military men, including assassins and torturers, ceded power to civilians, but only if they were never brought to trial. Carmen Quintana was 19 years old when one of these soldiers doused her with gasoline and set her on fire.
Ideally, we'd like to live in a peaceful country where differences had been resolved. But reconciliation is not possible until the truth is known and all the assassins are punished. So this can't ever happen again in Chile.
Air pollution is another legacy of the Pinochet regime. The military dictatorship multiplied the number of private bus permits in the capital, and now the situation is intolerable. Santiago is the most polluted city in South America. To combat the pollution, authorities must reduce the number of buses in the city center, but the government of Patricio Aylwin faces a democratic dilemma: how to satisfy Santiago residents who want to breathe clean air without alienating drivers like Manuel, whose jobs are on the line.
We've got to change jobs. We're going nowhere. It's a disaster.
But how? We're too old for office work. In this country, you can't get a job if you're over 27 or 30. I don't know what to do. Want some coffee?
Meanwhile, for Rafael Gilisasti, export manager at Concho y Toro, life has never looked so good.
New York office? Is Rick there, please?
When the dictatorship was overthrown, millions of North American and European consumers ended their boycott of Chilean wines. Exports have almost tripled. For Chilean wine merchants, democracy is good business.
Do you have some statistic of our sales in December, Christmas season? Ah, that's good news. We were not very hurt by the recession there, eh? That's good, that's good.
Meanwhile, Manuel Parra tries to stay afloat, keep his bus on the road, keep a job for himself. All mechanical parts are imported and expensive, and he dreads the smallest breakdown. To make matters worse, Manuel can't earn much. To reduce an impossible inflation level, the government has set the price of bus fares.
Claro, y no sube la tarifa no porque nosotros no tengamos necesidad de subirla, sino que
ticket prices don't rise, despite our needs. The government won't let us raise them because controlling prices is their way of juggling with inflation.
Para no subir la tarifa porque esta no es, claro, esa no es una mentira, o sea, es una realidad.
It's a political maneuver.
And believe it or not, this year they want to keep inflation at 15%.
Menos va a subir la locomoción. Porque este año fue el 18.
Claro. Está bien bueno.
Still, people talk of an economic miracle in Chile. The results of this opening to international markets are impressive. In 1989, when Chile could once again enjoy unrestricted trade, the results say it all. A 10% growth rate, the highest in the world. Even in 1991, in the midst of a worldwide recession, Chile's economy grew by 6%, but the real beneficiaries are exporters like Concha y Toro, who ship 40% of all the wine in Chile. Will this economic boon mean anything to the many struggling Chileans who paid the price of dictatorship? Jimmy Carter.
A proven and direct transition from a successful demand for human rights, with pressure from the outside being a very important factor, and a move to end a totalitarian and repressive regime. That brings about the election. The next step is not nearly so inevitable, and that is that the people will immediately have a better economic life.
Manuel Parra is in a jam. As a consumer, he suffers an inflation rate of about 20% a year. As a bus driver, he's stuck with fares fixed by the government. The bottom line is, since democracy, his financial situation has deteriorated, and he's not alone. He's part of the largest middle class in Latin America. When he and his wife Odilia do their accounts, the balance sheet is disappointing. Even with 2 salaries, there is no economic miracle. Not everyone has such problems. 10% of the population have become even richer since the return of democracy.
Buenas tardes, Marcial. ¿Cómo ha estado?
Bien, ¿cómo ha estado?
Muy bien. Hoy venía a revisar aquí el cuartel 14 para ver
Rafael Gilesasti is among the fortunate few who profit from the economic boom. The poor are still waiting for their share. More than 1/3 of Chileans live below the poverty line, and there is an urgent need for government-funded social programs. Reducing inequity is the major challenge for democracy in Latin America. Its survival depends on it. Of course, democracy has brought one important gain: freedom of speech. For 16 years during the dictatorship, Chileans were forced to be silent. Today, no one misses an opportunity to talk politics. The bus drivers at the table with Manuel are outspoken critics of the democratic government. But Manuel, a committed Democrat, fears it is democracy that will pay for their dissatisfaction.
Pero la democracia yo creo que no está inserta en el problema que tenemos nosotros en este momento. Yo creo que la democracia es mucho más al problema que tenemos nosotros. La democracia
Our problems have nothing to do with choosing democracy. Even in communist countries or fascist dictatorships, people are choosing the democratic way of life with all its imperfections. I'm not questioning democracy. I'm questioning appointing someone to the transport ministry who doesn't understand what our problems really are.
Del conjunto de las cosas. Eso es lo que
y nos entrevistamos con las empresas líderes y entre ellas incluso.
In the living rooms of the Santiago upper class, there is also talk of democracy, but the tone is different. Everyone knows current economic policies were instituted by the military regime, but it is Chile's new democratic look that makes for success. These businessmen know how the real world works. A return to dictatorship would compromise everything.
The country has become politically stable very quickly. We all know after the next elections, we'll have a very similar government to the one we have now. A coup d'etat seems far-fetched because we're well along the road to political stability.
I don't know anyone who's nostalgic for the military or Pinochet. Business people are realists. Even though they're not very sophisticated politically, they're realists. At the end of a year, they saw that democracy works better. It's good for making contacts. Europe's open to Chile, and it wasn't when there was a military regime.
Ahora, desgraciadamente, se han producido situaciones hoy que este gobierno no ha sido capaz.
Unfortunately, there are problems the government hasn't been able to fix, like healthcare.
A mí me tocó ir el otro día a un servicio médico y resulta
The other day, I was in a clinic where the doctors were so busy at meetings, they couldn't see any patients. This is the kind of thing that hurts working people. The democratic government's using the same social policies as the dictatorship.
Despite my admiration for the military's economic achievements, their government didn't have much of a social program, not even compassion for the poor. I think, thanks to democracy, this country is going to improve, and should improve.
Manuel Parra hopes for better days. Until then, he drives his bus 7 days a week. He has no choice. He hasn't had a vacation for 5 years. Even on Sundays, while others are on holiday, Manuel is shut in his bus. Odilia spends the day with him. They talk about themselves, their family, their 2 girls. One day they hope they too will enjoy the fruits of democracy.
I came here in 1934. I was 14 years old. I came to a city that was segregated. There were restaurants I couldn't eat in, stores I couldn't shop in, and many other places that I couldn't go. A lot has changed since then. Martin Luther King came with the civil rights movement in the 60s and changed many things. But we still have a long way to go. We have a lot of problems. We have a lot of social problems. We have a lot of homelessness, alcoholism, drugs, all of the problems you can think of.
Her friends call her Joe, an ordinary citizen with a will of iron. She's coming down the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. Here on August 28, 1963, Martin Luther King proclaimed, "I have a dream."
Live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Joe's real name is Josephine Butler. She was born in 1920 in Maryland. Joe still believes in Martin Luther King's dream. She's clear about her life work to help African Americans make their voices heard, to convince them they need not always lose at the game of democracy. It's tough going. In a recent presidential election, barely half the electorate voted, one of the lowest rates in history. The most alienated voters are in the Black and Hispanic ghettos of Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and especially the nation's capital, Washington. In the last municipal elections, 90% of Washington's wealthy residents voted. In the poorest area, barely 20%. Poor, disenfranchised people live in the shadow of white American power, 75% of them Black. And ironically, in this, the capital of the home of democracy, most residents are disillusioned with the democratic process. A street corner in the Black ghetto is the backdrop for a critique of American democracy. Joe Butler and her friend Henry Moore.
We're now approaching the Berlin Wall of Southwest Washington, D.C. That's divided upon economic lines in this community, whereas the haves and have-nots live here. And it also involves the voting procedure, those who vote and those who do not. It is widely considered that the people who live in the high-rises across the street vote. These who live over on this side of public housing do not vote. It's a scandal. It's awful that here we are, the capital of the United States of America, and right in the shadow of the capital of the United States.
A few blocks
from the capital of the United States of America, right across the street.
This kind of thing exists.
That's right.
And the people participate in it because they don't know any other way of life.
And they don't have any other way of life at this time because they have chosen not to vote. But if we could just continue voter education.
Well, I think we need to have a voter education seminar right on this corner.
It would be
and
ideal.
Let them see that corner, let them see this corner.
It's a long haul, but Joe Butler never misses a chance to spread the word. Henry Moore has invited her to speak to a group from the neighborhood.
Maybe somebody would like to sit over here.
Once again, she'll try to convince people to participate.
In the forefront of issues involving voting in the District of Columbia for a number of years now. She has set a precedent, more or less, because as an individual, she has shown what one person can do in regards to not only their own immediate community, but the city as well. And let's give her a little hand there for just doing what she's done.
I'm for everybody voting. I'd like to see us vote 100%. But I have to know why, what your ideas are, so that we can discuss them and see if we can move things further. And it goes a little bit beyond voting, because voting is only once every 4 years or 2 years that you get to participate.
Well, I put Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse.
That's okay. Yeah. Mickey Mouse counts.
Yeah, okay.
Mickey Mouse counts.
Well, that's what I vote for if I'm undecided.
I still have not found a job. Still don't have money to go back to school. So sometimes you ask yourself, does it matter with the right to vote?
We got millions of people all over this country who are homeless. Yeah. And that's the policy of one of the presidents who only got 26% and declared a landslide. Now, if the other 74% had been out there voting, he may not have won. And we might not have liked the other president, Mr. Carter, for some reason or the other, but you really have to weigh things, you know.
We want results. Like everybody in this room said, is it going to, are we going to make a difference in my vote? So what's the purpose of me turning out and casting my vote for no one?
That's a big question. But I still would like to take the positive side and say, let's try, seeing that nobody else gets elected with 26% of the vote.
I understand what you're saying too, but you know them too, as black people, we have been hearing it for so long and been hearing the promises for so long. And we still are looking at boarded up houses, no jobs, poor transportation, okay? And you can't even walk in a store in Georgetown without getting mugged by somebody that works there, scared you're gonna steal something. This is what you have, this is the truth. Okay? This is the truth. This is kind of getting away from what we're here for.
No.
But,
that's exactly what we're here for.
you know, this plays into what people have been programmed to think and programmed to do for over hundreds of years. Okay, and this is why people are just saying, hey, so what? You know, go waste my time going down there for what? I can't even go to the Safeway and buy my kids no oatmeal. Vote for what?
I was born and 2 years old before my mother got to vote. As a woman, women didn't get to vote until 1921. And I can still see how my father used to take my mother off to vote. That was the proudest thing in his life, to walk with my mother to the poll to vote. Now, don't tell me that those votes didn't begin to make a change, although there were whole areas of this country where you couldn't vote because you were black. But the ones who could vote were helping to bring us to the place where a Rosa Parks felt comfortable sitting down on a bus and saying, I'm not going to get up. And Martin Luther King felt comfortable standing up and said, I'm going to support. See, so we've come a long way.
And we've changed a lot.
Might not look like so far. We've come a long way.
The deterioration of the poor neighborhoods in our communities is going to affect us adversely. The crime rate, the drug culture, the school dropout rate, the incompetence of high school graduates whom we employ in our businesses, all those kinds of things that we permit to continue among poor families has a direct adverse effect on our own families. That binding together of all of us who are supposed to share the benefits of a free society, a democratic society, is something that we still have not successfully achieved.
Any chest pain, cough, shortness of breath or anything? See that you have been pretty busy these days, huh?
Yes, very much so.
Nothing stops Joe Butler. She's had tuberculosis for part of her life, and now she has cancer, diabetes, arthritis.
You're doing fine. I want you to take a flu shot before the flu season comes up. It's very important.
Okay.
Given a little bit
Pneumonia
your age.
and flu.
Pneumonia and flu.
Lay off my age.
Hello, how are you?
Oh,
Good to see you.
Fine,
Well,
good.
life treats you well. Great, great.
I know, I get younger every day.
Every day. Like rare vintage wine.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Joe Butler's energy comes from a profound conviction that the struggle of African Americans helped create what American democracy is today. She feels all citizens of the country, whatever their origins, have benefited. Israel Singer, Secretary General of the World Jewish Congress.
In the United States, during the 50s and 60s, when the struggle for human rights and civil rights for blacks was a struggle which was not particularly Jewish, Jews did not look upon this only in terms of how it would affect them, but struggled and fought for the rights of blacks as if they were fighting for their own rights. They died for the rights of blacks. At the forefront of this movement, they died in Mississippi, they died in Tallahassee, and this was a remarkable coalition that Jews formed. It changed the face of the basic beliefs of the Jews, and it made them believe that if no man had a door open to him, surely a Jew would not have a door open to him.
Hi, how are you doing, Pete?
Okay.
Good.
Where are you going?
Well, I'm on my way over on the hill to talk to some people about statehood. You know, we have this
If
bill
Joe
coming up
Butler is
next
to
week.
convince her people to exercise their right to choose, there must be forums available to them. An historical aberration prevents the 600,000 citizens of the capital of the United States from electing members to the House of Representatives and to the Senate. In 1971, along with other activists, Joe Butler founded the Statehood Party. It's committed to the creation of a new American state to be called New Columbia. Joe believes this would solve some of Washington's social problems. For her, democracy is more than a vague concept. It must become a tool for improving the quality of life.
What about these boarded up houses here? Do you think that a home rule will help us to renovate those and put people back in them?
Yes, definitely. Look at that one. Look at that one.
Yeah.
See, that's terrible.
They got a sign for rent. Now, who's going to rent? Look at these places right there.
But they need so much work done on it, and it's the nation's capital, you know, and with some help, the citizens would get the job done, but right now they don't have that control.
Yeah.
Jesse Jackson said that we are all put on earth for a purpose. And the Afro-Americans were brought to this country to save it spiritually. I believe that. And I believe I was put here in this city to do that. Thank you. Thank you.
Love you, Joe.
I love you too. The best thing that ever happened to me.
In 1990, Jesse Jackson was symbolically elected as senator by the people of Washington. At that time, the Senate had no black members.
In South Africa, in Soweto, they can vote for their local mayor, for their council, but they can't vote in Pretoria. They can't vote on matters of policy. Well, in Washington, D.C., we can vote for our mayor, our council. On matters of policy, we cannot vote on Capitol Hill. So in reality, we administer the nation's capital. We do not govern it. We do not have the right of self-determination. Every capital in the Western world, plus Beijing and Moscow, is enfranchised in its national government, except ours.
Jesse Jackson devotes his energy to the creation of the state of New Columbia and also to the participation of African Americans in U.S. democracy. He thinks conditions are right. After all, it's election time.
There's no better time than now to negotiate with senators and congresspeople and gain their vote while they need our vote. That's really part of our strategy as well.
That all sounds beautiful to me. Again, I'm glad you're here.
It's going to happen real soon, Joe.
I'm glad you're here to help us out.
Thank you.
I just love this city. This is me. I love this city. I know the trees. I know the people. I know the birds. You know, I feel like that I was put here for something. This is the place where I can be most useful. That's what I want to be. Thank you.
Nice to talk with you. Bye-bye. See you later. Thank you.
El Salvador is Central America's smallest nation with 5 million people. It's emerging from a terrible 12-year civil war. Tens of thousands of people were killed, social, economic, and political structures totally disorganized. El Salvador is a country that reflects a region. Nicaragua, Guatemala, Panama, a powder keg.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Please pull over. We're doing a search.
In December 1991, a ceasefire was signed between the Salvadorian government and the rebels of the Farabunda Martí Liberation Front. The guns are silenced, but the people are still armed. There are frequent military patrols, yet here and there are signs of hope, and people like Cristina Avila. Widowed when she was only 18, Cristina is the mother of 2 children. She buys the materials to rebuild her war-torn village.
Your papers?
We only have the card the immigration authorities gave us when we came back to the country.
When did you come back?
In November '89.
The people of Cristina's village remember their return from exile in Honduras. Terrorized by the Civil War, they had fled El Salvador in 1981, seeking safety in the United Nations refugee camps. They were a small part of a mass exodus. In the United States alone, there are some 500,000 Salvadorians. It was a difficult, dangerous exodus. Cristina fled the country with her mother and 4 of her brothers. In the daytime, the army could have seen them and killed them, so they walked at night, sleeping during the day. Cristina and her compatriots were allowed to return to El Salvador, but only after years of negotiation with the government. Officials opposed their re-entry, claiming the country was at war, but the villagers argued they wanted to work for peace. Convinced the time was right, they left the camps and walked back to their home. Upon their return, they renamed their village Segundo Montes, after a Jesuit priest who was killed by the army.
The government tried, by all means, to convince us not to come back because the country was at war. But we knew it was a good time to return and that we'd be able to work for peace. Comrades, finally, Mianguera, Morazan, after 10 years of exile, we're home. We didn't come back to take part in a war, but to take part in making peace.
Why are you bringing in these materials?
For our clean water project.
Do you have a permit?
No, the colonel agreed we wouldn't need a permit.
And the bill?
Yes. Do you need it? Why so many regulations? These pipes are for clean water. Or do you think they're for something else?
No, I'd like you to pay attention. We're trying to restrict the entry of certain materials into resistance zones where there are guerrillas. We found workshops making explosives and learned they're made with these kinds of materials.
We don't know if the rebels need these things to make weapons. We do know 8,000 people need them urgently to repair their piping.
Reparar las cañerías, de construir más cañerías. No sabemos si la guerrilla lo necesitará o a saber. 10 años estuvimos.
For the 10 years we were in exile, there was a war, and we weren't able to provide them with these materials. Now that we can come back, do you honestly think we've come to provision the rebels? We've come to build our own society, our own community.
Can I look inside?
Yes, we have nothing illegal or prohibited.
They want to make their village a model of community organization, but in this extremely militarized country, it's not an easy task. The village of Segundo Montes is caught in a crossfire between government troops and the rebels. They're not shooting at each other right now, but peace is certainly not assured. Today, Cristina passes easily through the military controls. Sometimes people are arrested, or the building materials they carry are confiscated. This barrier is the border between Army territory and the more than 40% of El Salvador controlled by the rebels. Adjusting to democracy is not easy. Past president of Costa Rica and Nobel Prize winner for his peace plan for Central America, Oscar Arias.
Cuando introdujimos el plan de paz,
when we introduced the Central American Peace Plan, we thought democracy was necessary in order to have peace, and peace necessary for development and progress.
Poco a poco El Salvador,
little by little, El Salvador strengthened and perfected its democratic institutions, now accepted by most Salvadorians.
Aceptadas por la gran mayoría del pueblo salvadoreño.
Finally, we have made peace and silenced the arms.
Now is the time to rebuild. Segundo Montes was totally destroyed by war. Houses, schools, roads, nothing is left. With the help of international aid agencies and with training gained in the refugee camps, the community is taking charge. In this troubled region, democracy lives at the grassroots. First, the village created committees. They evaluate community needs and establish priorities. The goal is to become economically self-sufficient rather than accepting donations. When the United Nations offered them clothing, they asked for cloth and sewing machines. Rather than ready-made shoes, they wanted leather and shoemaker's tools. They built workshops. Democracy evolved. Cristina Avila is responsible for marketing all local products.
We'll be able to get all the eggs out of here. We won't let them pile up. We'll sell them all and even make a profit.
After 2 years, the people of Segundo Montes produce enough eggs, poultry, cheese, jam, pork, and vegetables to sell outside the village. It's self-sufficient in corn, rice, and potatoes, and it's even started its own savings fund. All this in a country which could at any moment explode.
As far as the rebels are concerned, well, they support our community projects, ours as well as projects in other communities in North Morazan.
Where are you from?
San Luis. We're going to Perquín and Huatique to sell eggs.
Respetan su trabajo.
They respect community work. They never destroy people's harvests. And if they have to mine an area to sabotage an enemy operation, they tell the people where not to walk. The army doesn't do that. How are things there?
Fine. The army mobilized its troops around Perquín, but yesterday they left.
So we can go through without problems?
Yes, you can.
Segundo Montes is known on both sides of the border. Its social, political, and economic success are the envy of villages throughout the region.
Good afternoon. We're going to start the meeting. As you all know, negotiations between the rebels and the government are progressing. So our group should begin to talk about how we'll fit in after the ceasefire.
But this island of peace does not obscure that this is a tormented region. The villagers meet regularly and speak their minds. Grassroots democracy in action. But no one forgets that despite the 1991 peace accord, neither side will demilitarize the areas it controls. The outcome of the El Salvador peace process is significant. A durable peace would be an example to other strife-torn Central American countries. But then, what kind of peace? What kind of democracy? The village of Segundo Montes, with its unique model of development, is an exception in war-torn El Salvador. Democracy is the politics of compromise, but what will it take to maintain harmony and avoid a return to civil war? In the coming years, the village will have to integrate fully into the life of El Salvador. What will become of the hard-earned benefits enjoyed by the people of Segundo Montes? Their guaranteed minimum wage, free health care, free daycare, an infant mortality rate as low as that of the wealthy countries. Their education system, all these programs are rare luxuries in this region of the world known for its great disparities of wealth and lifestyles.
Our community is finally seeing our dream come true. The dream of a Salvador without repression, of a country where we can express our feelings and live in peace. We see a future in which our children have the opportunity to study and the possibility of a life different from ours.
To make this dream reality, the ghosts of the past must be laid to rest. The inhabitants of Segundo Montes returned to the scene where on December 11th, 1981, on a night of torrential rain, the army murdered 1,000 people. This is the tragedy that convinced the villagers to seek peace in exile. With the international press in attendance, the people of Segundo Montes dedicate a monument to the tens of thousands killed in the Civil War. They proclaim their desire to live in peace and their ability to keep their development model humane. In a region as troubled as Central America, these peasants have accomplished the impossible. They have built an oasis of democracy.
Ellos no han muerto. Están
They
con
are not
nosotros,
dead.
con ustedes,
They are with us.
y con la
You,
humanidad entera.
all of humanity.
El Mozote,
El
11 de
Mozote,
diciembre de
December 11th,
1991.
1991.
So we still have a long way to go in this continent. The most obvious example is Cuba. I hope someday we'll be able to participate in a democratic election in Cuba. In some cases, democracy has been for a civilian leader who, in effect, is only a figurehead, whereas the military still runs the country and makes the basic decisions. But the progress has been steady toward genuine freedom and genuine democracy.